Hello and welcome to History Yesterday with your host, Tyler Von Woodsen. And tonight we will be looking back at the 1940s and the Second American World War. And we will look at the joyous and tragic moments of that time. But always on History Yesterday we ask that one simple question, and our question tonight is, to what extent did the 1940s mark a turning point on America's home front? Our first guest tonight was the Secretary of War during World War II under Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He will help us give an in-depth look at the American economy. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Henry Stimson. How are you, Mr. Stimson?
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. I'm very well, thanks. And yourself?
So tonight we are asking a very important question. The question is, to what extent did the 1940s mark a turning point in the American home front? Can you help us answer this question?
Well, I suppose.
Your time starts now.
Oh, well, President Roosevelt tried to stay neutral because in the last war we were driven into war by profit-seeking businesses. So Roosevelt did not want to repeat in great casualties. Unfortunately, World War II did start after England and France were tired of giving Adolf Hitler power and land in Europe to prevent war. And once Hitler invaded Poland, it was the last straw, and war began. As an attempt to stay neutral, Congress passed legislation that would prevent the United States from supplying countries at war with weapons. These are known as the Neutrality Acts. But President Roosevelt couldn't turn a blind eye to those in need, so Congress also passed the Cash and Carry and Lend-Lease Acts, which allowed Britain to buy weapons from the United States as long as they could pay it back at a later time.
Yeah.
Winston Churchill was constantly asking President Roosevelt to enter the war. We were eventually pulled into World War II after the Japanese bombed us at Pearl Harbor. After Pearl Harbor, you see, many people feared that Japanese Americans were spies and would assist in the Japanese war effort.
So we put them into internment camps like we put Native Americans on reservations in the late 19th century. Is that correct?
Exactly. That is a very good connection to another time period in American history. That could even get you a stimulus point on an AP test.
Do you have anything else you can add for us, Mr. Stimson?
There's not much that I can cover here tonight that would help you answer your question. All I know is the war details and nothing much on the home front.
Well, thank you anyway, and you have a wonderful day now.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. And welcome back to History Yesterday with your host, Tyler Von Woodsen. And our next guest is a very special lady, because she will help us give an in-depth look at what Franklin Delano Roosevelt was really thinking, because she was his wife. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt.
Hello, it's great to be here.
It's an honor to have you here, Mrs. Roosevelt. Now, on History Yesterday, we always ask a question for our audience viewers, and our question tonight is, to what extent did the 1940s mark a turning point in the American home front? Mrs. Roosevelt, do you think you could help us answer this question?
I'd be delighted to. Well, as you know, World War II ended May 1945. Unfortunately, my husband died shortly before the end of the war, and so he did not get to see the end. But he did participate in the Yalta Conference, which was a conference that helped plan the Europe and the world after World War II would be over. And he wanted an international peace organization, which eventually became the UN.
Thank you, but could you go over more of the home front basis rather than foreign policy?
Of course. After my husband's death, President Truman took over, and he created many advances such as the DI bill and desegregating the military.
Yes, and for the viewers that don't know at home, could you go over what the GI Bill is?
Of course. The GI Bill gave benefits to war veterans that helped them pay for homes and go to college. Life in the United States truly improved.
Indeed it did, especially for those who fought and who were brave in that war. And tonight we have a war veteran here ourselves. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Clayton McKee.
Great to be here. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Mrs. Roosevelt.
Why are you talking so loud here, son?
Sorry, I sustained extensive hearing loss during the war.
I can tell.
Anyway, after the war, a bunch of my buddies and I received a whole lot of benefits for fighting the war. Right now, my friend Sammy is in school to become a doctor thanks to the GI Bill.
I'm so glad you and your friends got the benefits you deserve.
Thank you, ma'am. Also, because of the GI Bill, me and my wife are in the midst of buying a house for me and the fam.
Wonderful. How is your wife?
She's doing great. During the war, she got a job in the factory, and now she's a secretary for a big bank. It has a funny name, something like Wells Fargo. But yeah, she's doing mighty fine in her new job.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm so happy that women are working alongside men. America is indeed a great place.
America is great indeed. And it's been an honor to have you here, Mrs. Roosevelt, and you too, Mr. McKee. It's got pleasure.
It's a pleasure.
We'll be right back. And welcome back to History Yesterday. Our third guest of the night is another very special person because he was a former president. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Thomas Dewey. Wait, he wasn't a president. Oh, right, Harry Truman. It's great to have you here, Mr. Truman. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you doing? It's great to be here.
I'm great. On History Yesterday, we always ask a question at the beginning of the show. And tonight's question is, to what extent did the 1940s mark a turning point on America's home front? Can you help us answer that question, Mr. Truman?
Yes. Well, when I was president, I worked on my fair deal to create positive change in the healthcare, education, civil rights, and the housing sectors. Although I was opposing Congress by many conservatives, I was very successful, if I do say so myself.
Wow, you were a pretty good president.
Thank you. Also, when I was president, I had to work to contain communism throughout Europe and South America. My supporters called this the Truman Doctrine. Basically, I gave aid to countries to resist Soviet influence. George Marshall, my Secretary of State, created the Marshall Plan, which gave more money to European countries to stimulate growth recuperation. Although we tried to extend the plan to the Soviet Union, they refused.
Oh, alright, too bad. But can I ask you one more question?
Of course.
Did you truly end the war in Japan?
Yes, I would say so. I decided to drop the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. After these bombs were dropped, the Japanese were quick to surrender. But I will have you know that the decision to drop these bombs was based on saving Americans' lives from a mainland assault of Japan, and also a tiny bit to intimidate the Soviets by showing our military capability.
Thank you for your time here, Mr. Truman, and we all learned today that that nuclear weapons in the wrong hands, the Soviets, is always a bad thing. Thank you for being here, Mr. Truman.
It was a pleasure.
We'll be right back. And welcome back to History Yesterday. Our final guest of the night is very special. However, it's no Roosevelt or Truman. She is very key in the mobilization of America during World War II. You've seen her on posters. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Rosie the Riveter!
Hello, it's great to be here.
Rosie, tonight we are asking the question, to what extent did the 1940s mark a turning point on America's home front? Could you give us an in-depth look at that?
Yeah, well, I'd say that the 1940s marked a turning point to a great extent because there was a large increase in federal spending and the state of America greatly changed.
Wow, off to a pretty good start.
Yeah, so the government was spending a lot of money to stimulate the economy after the Great Depression, and they were also spending to create war supplies. They had cost-plus contracts, which paid businesses to make war supplies, plus a little bit more for faster effort and work. And as a result, many workers had higher wages and therefore more money in general. Congress also passed the Anti-Inflation Act, which allowed government to freeze prices, wages, and rents to prevent inflation.
Well, that was pretty smart of them.
Yes, it really was. The government also encouraged people to ration rubber, gas, meat, sugar, oil, and coffee. People were pushed to plant victory gardens to increase food production, and many minorities and women entered the workforce. There was full-blown mobilization during the war.
Well, ain't that swell? And I hear you got a large part in getting our women into the workforce.
Yeah, I did in fact. I was a motivational symbol to encourage ladies to join the workforce. And if I do say so myself, I was pretty successful. We needed our girls to take over the jobs the boys had lost when they went off to war. Many of our girls also joined the military as nurses and got deployed. After the war, many girls returned home, but also some stayed in the workforce, and this has changed the face of America's working people.
Well, that's it for tonight, folks. It's been great to have Rosie and every one of our guests here tonight, and I hope we answered the question before the 1940s and after the 1940s. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Should we do the signature sign out? Ready? We can do it, America!